My name is Travis Faske. I'm the extension plant pathologist for the University of Arkansas, primarily with soybean and corn and some cotton peanut work actually. So for this meeting, I thought to put together just a snapshot of what we've done in the last couple of years in regard to some of our corn disease management strategies. There's a couple of diseases that tend to give us fits every year. One of those is northern corn leaf blight. And here you can see what they refer to as the cigar-shaped lesions, which is pretty descriptive. In some cases, on a highly susceptible hybrid, they can be relatively long, and others are not. But they kind of have a gray-green color to them. They start out kind of water-soaked and they get darker brown. You can see here, kind of, you have to use a little of your imagination, I think. But when you're growing a highly susceptible hybrid, under the right conditions, you can get some pretty significant yield loss. Most of our guys, I think, are using a source of resistance that is probably the best way to manage this disease, and hence the name northern. We're in the south. It tends to be a problem once you get up around to I-80 more than it is around I-40. All right, another point out, the pathogen Zyrohylum tercissum has a host range beyond corn. This is what it looks like on grain sorghum, so that is leaf blight is all it's called. But I can almost always find it on Johnson grass, on the turn rows and the edge of the field. Early in the season, if you go look at that Johnson grass, you'll see this really long lesion, and that's actually northern corn leaf blight on Johnson grass. Now, how many spores are produced by that, how much of that is going to cause a problem in that field? I think it's pretty negligible given the resistance that we're using. This is another one that it seemed like it's becoming, I don't know, it's more common last year. And this is a picture from Tom Allen in Mississippi State. This is the Plodia leaf streak. And of course, based on the size of the pin, that's about what I would expect to see a size of a northern corn leaf blight lesion. So I put this up there just to point of be aware that if you see one spot out in the field, it may not be northern corn leaf blight, especially if you have a hybrid that's resistant and you're finding some of this, it may not be northern corn leaf blight, maybe this Diplodia leaf streak. You can see here the edges tend to be a little bit ragged in appearance and not smooth, kind of like that northern corn leaf blight. And if you have a really good hand lens and you look really close, you'll see these little curly cues in here. And then that's more common of this Diplodia leaf streak. And those little curly cues is actually the fungus producing more spores, and they keep producing and they kind of get a curly cue shape. All right, so when do we see this most commonly is when we're using susceptible hybrids. The tillage this is really a trash fungus, I call it. So it's living in the trash and overwinters in all that trash. Often when I see it in the field, if it's had a lot of water movement, all that trash gets to be the bottom end of the field, and I'll find it there. In areas where we have continuous corn production, it's also problematic too. Even with some tillage, you can find it, and often in those cool, wet patterns. And this needs to stay for a couple of weeks being cool before it really starts to fire up. And this, to me, and I've looked not excessively hard, but that's about as severe as I can find. So I'm showing you the extreme best pictures I possibly can. Most of the time I'm finding little spots in the field. It's not too bad. So as pathologists, some people accuse of us of being too focused and too triangulated. But the reason we are is because every time we mention something like this, when it's most common, is based on the disease triangle. When you have the host, the pathogen, and the right weather, that's what triggers disease. Anytime one of those is off kilter, you're not going to have a disease issue. And for us, most of the time, that weather pattern is not going to stay in that cool, wet environment. We're in the south, we tend to get hot and dry really quickly. So even though I'll spot some northern corn leaf blight, the weather doesn't allow it to kind of continue to be real bad. All right. Resistance, I mentioned that there's a lot of seed companies here, a lot of great hybrids that are out there that are available. Tillage I kind of touched on, and we'll take a little bit on fungicide timing and efficacy. So what would you expect from fungicides applied at early vegetative stages of growth? Oftentimes, I think our conditions in the south that would be conducive for northern corn leaf blight would be at this stage. And there's a lot of promotion in the Midwest about, hey, applying a fungicide while you're going out and putting that other shot of atrazine out, running across the field. But what would you expect? I'm not going to go through every trial I had, but in 2014 and 2015, we had pretty extensive multi-fungicide trials at the V6 and at the V8 stage. We had about 5 different fungicides. Here's just a take home. Look at the yield response there. 1 year, it was less than the non-treated control. 1 year that it was higher than the non-treated control. You average those and it's 0. So your benefit to yield in applying that early season is probably about 0. I really wouldn't recommend it. Given corn prices the way they are now, I don't think you're gonna be able to put money in the bank with that. At this point right here, that VT timing seems to be pretty close. I would say between VT and R2 is one that's gonna be the most critical. Here when we have both of those together, it looks a little attractive that you can apply both of those at the same time. The take home from that would be that you cannot get away with this timing alone for disease control. Now, that 38 bushel to me is huge, and I was impressed. There was a lot of southern rust that year, and I'll show you some pictures of it. But one thing I'll point out too, in 2014, as Crystal mentioned, she had pretty good yields. We had about 93 here, and when you have a pretty high yield, the response to the fungicides tends to be a little bit lower. When I get about 145, it tends to be much greater in the presence of disease. It's really almost the opposite, Cliff, what we think about when we're usually talking about, yield response. Usually you're saying go out and apply it when you have the highest yield to protect it. But for corn, I'm still questioning that. It still seems to be a little odd. All right, the other risk is a part where we're going to go automatic and say we're just going to go out at VTR1 no matter what issues we have. This was a foliar fungicide trial in 2013. It ended up being a non-disease year for me. And then these are various fungicides from headline to Domark applied at a VT timing. There's a lot of variability there, right? I was quite concerned. I was really surprised. Our average benefit to yield was -8 bushel. And I would assume there'd be some variation. This is an Armor. There may be some variation with some of the other hybrids, but that really struck me and why we're not recommending those automatic application. And you'll see that disease pressure has a big influence on the yield benefit when it comes to the fungicides. All right, here we have a 2014 trial. These are just my VT timings. And this is an Ag Venture 9583, and that'll be used throughout the 2014-2015 trials. Here we have a pretty positive response from all the fungicides, so it's lower than the non-treated control. This is northern corn leaf blight, but the best I could ever do was a low disease incidence. So at the VT, I've got less than 1%. That's when we applied the fungicide. That's really not at a threshold level that I would go out, but we did it anyway. And we can see we picked up by another 5% on non-treated control. The weather just doesn't allow that disease to really take off in our area, but those fungicides did reduce it compared to non-treated control by half. There's little stars here tell me that there's a treatment effect at the 10% or 90% level for Approach Prima, look good, as well as Delmark. But I gotta say, almost all of those look pretty good. Yield response definitely gives you the impression that when you have a disease, you're gonna get a positive response from yield. These average 13.5. Before on 2013, it was -8, so pretty dramatic. Break-even scenario for corn will be about 5 to 10 bushel per acre, and all of those would have exceeded that. So pretty much what I'm saying is any fungicide applied in the presence of disease when it came to northern corn leaf blight did pretty good. And I really couldn't separate one of those over the other. Did have a little southern rust that came in later, and I do think that's where we get a little benefit from some of the pre-mixes more than those solo fungicides themselves. But northern quarter leaf blight is really not the one I'm really worried about for you guys here, definitely in the south. It's this one that scares me, and that's southern rust. So it's the one that really can pick up on those leaves, cover them up, and this past year we had some that were 70% of that leaf area was covered. If you look at an ear leaf and you find 100 pustules on that ear leaf, that's about 1% in my ratings. So you can go from 1% to 40% in about a week. So it can move pretty quickly. This is the one that'll show up on the leaves as well as the sheath here and the stalks later on in the season. And it's pretty dramatic as far as the disease is concerned. When does it arrive in Arkansas? And I would conclude this to the Mid-South. Sometimes it can be really early, sometimes it's late. On average, I start looking for it around July. In Mississippi, if they see it at the end of June, I give myself about 2 weeks before I start seeing it in Arkansas. All these maps come from the IPM pipe, which Tom Allen and I and Trey, we post all that information on there so you can see when those are rust is coming in from the south. And that's a great way to give you a warning if it's going to be a problem in your area. And each year you can see it's moving a little differently. It comes in a little differently based on that weather pattern. But that's a great website. You just have to Google IPM pipe, like a lead pipe. And you can find these maps. They reset every year. You can see what's happened in the years past. Also, there's blog websites that we post on when we do see rust coming into the area. All right, so if you're out in the field early on in the season, what we promote looking for is this is one single rust pustule. This is the upper leaf surface, and this is the lower leaf surface. So there's no pustule on the bottom of the leaf. Is kind of a diagnostic feature. Here it is, it's picking up a little bit more. After that one spot, I would say this could be like 14 days later if it's a dry year, 7 days later if it's a perfect year for southern rust. Here's common rust. Here's the one we expect every year, hence the name common. This should be a brick red color to you. Those pustules are a little bit more elongated, and here we have them compared to the southern rust. So it's a nice comparison. Southern rust, and here's some of the common rust. And that's great. It's always nice to see these pictures during the winter time, but when you're out in the field looking at them, it's always not so easy. So definitely use your diagnostic folks to be able to help you out with these. All right, here's the upper and lower leaf surface for common rust. The traditional thing is that you would see pustules on the lower leaf surface. It's not 100%. So one pustule here does not guarantee that you'll see one here, but for the majority of it, you do see a few of them. And then that would tell me it's common rust. The other thing, if I'm out in the field, this is where I expect to find southern rust and common rust. If I walk out, it's going to be from my knees down. I will always find common rust. And then southern rust tends to be about in this range. Usually if I'm out looking at the season, I'm looking somewhere about here. I don't have to stoop over. I can usually find it. Or somebody else out there, another county agent, or folks from the industry are also helpful. They'll say, hey, we've seen it, and we'll report it on that IPM pipe, but that's where they're looking, that's where they're finding it. All right, management strategies. Resistance is really not a factor. I would say that all the hybrids out there are either susceptible or highly susceptible or extremely susceptible. So we really don't have any resistances there. Avoidance, for the folks in the south of I-40, it's kind of a gamble. You can miss it by planting early, but it just depends on what time it comes in. The folks up north in Arkansas, like the Boot Hill, I think do avoid it most of the time. It comes in way too late in the season for them to really have a problem with it. But those of us who are relying on fungicides, I've got a couple of slides here just expanding on that fungicide timing and the efficacy that we've done. All right, so this is some of our field trials. The Arkansas River is back here, which is a nice place to do these. We get a nice moist environment even late in the season, and hoping that we get southern rust. These are actually driving lanes. So this is a multi-boom sprayer that's attached to a tractor on the front end loader, so that we can actually apply essentially what an airplane would do, but we're using a lot higher volume. This is about 15 gallons. So the ratings that I'm going to give you, I think, would be the best case scenario when you're referring to coverage. So it just has a compressor here, and inside, based on our plots, we just flip switches as we're moving through from one treatment to the other. So I don't know how many plots were out here, but we're talking several hundred each year. That's some information, those of you interested. Planting time, we're later than what Crystal said. We're trying to look at something so we can actually get disease pressure. Rust came in this past year, July 13th, VT. So what I mean by a trace is I could go out to the field and find one pustule like I showed you, walk to another plot, I may find one pustule, so on and so forth. It's not really a whole lot. And then we did ratings at 14 and 28 days after planting. So this is my selfies. So this is me before and after rating half of the plots. My technician rated the other. So this is how you start, and this is how you finish. That is all rust spores. And so you're welcome. I did this just for you so that you can sit in comfort. So it was a pretty bad rust year. I was pretty excited about it though. Okay. Here's our non-treated control. Just share with you one kind of visual. It's sometimes hard to see. That's rust. That's an issue of rust. That's rust. That's kind of a problem. Here's tilt, something we've commonly in the past kind of said, hey, if you can get away with it, it has some curative activity. But boy, I was really surprised how little it did here to southern rust. Here's Quilt Excel at the same time. That's pretty clean. I was impressed by it. That Strobe is definitely bringing something to the table. As Crystal said, she was using Quadris and Headline. I think she's on the right track. Here's our ratings. This is the ear leaf, how severe it is. So 52% of that ear leaf was covered with tilt or non-treated control. No difference between those two. It's pretty nasty. Look at Quilt Excel, about 6%. And so it held at 28 days after and did a pretty good job. I was impressed. You can really see what that Strobe is definitely bringing to the table. Yield-wise, huge difference there. 47 bushel over the non-treated control. And that little star there tells me it's significantly different than the non-treated. Now, someone who's using wanting to save money, that tilt probably exceeded that break-even scenario. A couple of dollars an acre, you can get it covered. It probably still did the job, but definitely it left some money on the table here. And that was 144 bushel per acre. All right, what about the late season? Rust came in, teared us up. I've got to do something. Maybe I feel good if I go ahead and apply something about R5. What would you expect from that? So this is our yield over the non-treated control. We put out Quilt at VT, and then we put it out at Dent. We had 40% southern rust on that ear leaf. You know, what is this, a salvage application? Yeah, you might say that. I'm trying to salvage something from it. There was no suppression of southern rust. I'm not even going to show you that data. But this is the yield response. Timing is critical. Going out way too late, that rust is too aggressive for that fungicide to shut it down. I had a -3. I don't think it was quite negative. I don't think the fungicide did a negative part in it, but that's just the way the data ran out. And that's just 1 year of data. It's hard to say that that's going to be consistent. We'll do it again next year. What about from a lodging yeah?
You were saying the application went out late. What if the rust comes in late?
Yeah, it's a good question. And trying to look at each one of these scenarios that is possible takes a lifetime. But we have trials that are set up that would be available for that. I don't think, if it came in, my time would be VT to R2. I think if it came in at R5, I wouldn't worry about it at all. Even at R4, I probably wouldn't worry about it either. It just depends on what the weather is. It's all based on that disease triangle. Good question, though. What about for lodging? What might affect? Now this I have lodging in quotes because all we did was kind of a push test to see if we could push them over. If they felt like they were going to give, we stopped because we were actually going to harvest these. So this is just in a percentage. So at BT, 2.8% of those plants kind of gave with that fungicide applied at BT. When applied at R5, 3.6. So it didn't reduce that. If you're going to reduce anything from a lodging standpoint, you're probably still looking within that VT to R2 timing. Getting outside of that, I don't think you're going to get a lot of benefit from that, especially not in regards to lodging. Okay, this kind of maybe helped answer your question. This is kind of what we've done is kind of a timing, trying to go out and say, well, what would benefit at a trace and a 1%? So, you know, we used to use, I'm just showing Quilt Excel here since we kind of showed it looked pretty good. So at 14 days after VT, for this one, there's non-treated control, there's nothing. The trace here, it already had the fungicide that went out. And then here it went out at that time. Okay, so here we're seeing the protection. Here there's no protection. What happened 14 days after for this R2? It's definitely less than the non-treated control, but you can see getting that fungicide out early had a dramatic response. So we went from 0% to 1% in 14 days. But we went from 1% to 45% in 14 days. We waited till we had 1% of that leaf area covered. It's 100 pustules on the ear leaf. What I was surprised is by the time we got out here to the VT and R2, we're pretty similar. We did better than we did with the non-treated control. It was at 100%, but we'll get to the yield next. The one thing is I guess this really emphasizes the challenges of thresholds when it comes to foliar diseases. How long can I wait? How much can I wait for is a real gamble. It's quite a risk. Yield response over the non-treated control. These two statistically are the same, but I gotta say that you've got 11 bushels here that you left out if you would actually applied it at the right timing. So fungicides are most effective in the presence of disease and right at the onset. And I'd even have to say that for almost all of them. That Strobe is definitely bringing something to the table that the triazole itself is not. And that kind of changes my way of thinking, honestly, a little bit from what we've done in the past. So there's my window. That's when the agronomists have said that leaf area loss during that time has the biggest impact on yield, and that would correlate to our data. So that kind of validates some of the things that they have said as well. All right, my second last slide, summary slide. Again, I don't think that the V5 to V7s have a lot of value in our area, and don't rely on those as a solo for protecting of diseases in your fields. You definitely have to use a VT timing at some point, but it sounds attractive, but I don't think it's going to be profitable. And pre-mix between VT and R2 would probably have the best potential for southern rust control. But I definitely like to see it coming in. I like for it to be a threat. As you saw in 2013, we didn't have any southern rust, and there was a lot of variation within those fungicides. Corn prices the way they are, it's a way we can save money. And those late applications, I think, have little value in regards to yield protection. So those would be my 3 take-home messages from this presentation. If you got nothing else from it, you got those 3 points, I call what I did a success. All right, there's my last slide. If you have any questions, email, Twitter. A lot of this is supported by Arkansas Corn Board, and if time's available, I will be glad to answer any questions you might have. If not, we can get out early. Yes, sir.
I know north of I-40, where I work, southern rust blowing up in there and being detrimental. It's a coin toss some years.
It is.
This year was pretty extensive, but we got a lot of guys that do the preventative shot at VT R2 stage. We got some that don't. As far as for that area, what do you feel like is the best? I know that everybody's looking at every little dollar and cents.
Yeah. A lot of the consultants from that area called me this past year, and we went through some of those scenarios. It is nothing, you're right, it's nothing like what we were doing around Pine Bluff where all these studies are. The weather's perfect. It's really, I'm trying to find a place that really drives that disease. I think there's a lot of times that there's no benefit from it, just like 2013. Without a disease out there, I cannot guarantee you any yield benefit whatsoever. And I know a lot of those guys would had southern rust. I actually followed behind them and said, where is it in the field? They said, well, we found on one leaf. And I went out 14 days after them, I still couldn't find it. And they didn't apply fungicide, they were happy with it, they saved their money. Most of the times in that area, I think you can get away without doing it. But if you were in that area, I would be probably a little bit more concerned about northern corn leaf blight than I would be southern rust. So definitely hybrid selection would be my thing. I would base more on that.
We tend to see northern several years.
Yeah, you do. And in the study that I had a response by, that 6 was a incidence. So that's how many plants out of 100 had one lesion, 6 of them. So it wasn't a lot. It was pretty low pressure, I would say. And so I've seen some worse, but so it gives you an idea. If you're finding 1 or 2 lesions out in your field, I don't think you're having any kind of impact on yield loss whatsoever. I think you can get away with even out using the fungicide then too. Especially if you're looking at that long range forecast and it's showing in the 90s, that northern corn leaf blight is going to shut down pretty quick. And that's when southern rust is going to start picking up. And keep in mind, for you growers, getting to the end of the season and saying, I've got 0 disease is really impractical. And I would not strive to do that. I would say if I've got a little disease, I've got 1%, 2%, and I've got to the end, I would call that a success. And I've saved the fungicide and kept that money in my pocket. That would be a success. That would be what I would be striving to do. Yeah.
But you didn't do any tests. You did 3 shots of fungicide, like a R5 and then, V5 and R1 and R4.
If I did 3 shots, that would probably get me to about 30. I would have to have 30 bushel probably to have a break-even scenario, and I would doubt that I would make that.
See, Clay County and Butler County, Missouri, I sprayed everything twice each year.
Yeah.
If we do V5 shot automatic, just because we've got so much corn leaf blight up there, and which we found
Is that at V5 you're finding northern corn leaf blight?
yeah, it's just kind of an automatic thing.
Yeah.
Which most of the hybrids we plant are pretty susceptible to calf varieties.
Yeah. Well, we have the same trial that you saw there with all those, and someone does it from Illinois, Indiana, and others, and we've all come back with kind of the same response, though. We don't see a positive benefit to yield from those V5 shots.
Yeah.
And you may think about trying to run a strip or 2 in the field or splitting it to see what kind of benefits you are yield, because in our trials, I'm not seeing it. And I think you could save some money by maybe not doing it.
Is the lodging benefit alone not almost an insurance policy by putting it out at VT then?
That V5, I don't see any difference in lodging when we go back to and compare the V5, the VT, and the V5 and VT timing. And of course, we're doing a push test. We're not looking at the entire field, but we're not seeing that benefit from it. I would say from my folks, my counterparts in Iowa State, she would say that shot at VT would probably do more for lodging than any other time. Yeah. And if you're worried about lodging, the only time I've seen a lot of lodging is when you have these beds that are hipped up, and if you're ever planting flat or and smooth beds, I haven't seen a lot. And based on our plant populations too, that we've got those down, I think we have less lodging issues. When we've had lodging, we've had those populations up really high as well. Great questions though, and it helps me to understand. As far as you growers, I'm really here for you, and I'm trying to answer questions you have. So if there's something that comes up after this meeting, you want to grab me, I'll be glad to visit with you. We still have a little.
Have you worked much with early season anthracnose
Good.
and the fungicide applications that prior to V5 was right?
That does, and that's a great question. Genetically, what happens is there's 2 stages of anthracnose. One of them is early on, one of them is later. So really, if you get to V5 and you've got, just a little bit of anthracnose, it's not going to pick up on you until later in the season. So you could really avoid that early application and then just go out at a VT application and save your money from that first one.
So just ignore it.
Just ignore it. Yeah. It's not going to pick up on you because you have so much green leaf material at that time. It's growing exponentially, and the fungus itself, because of the environment, it's not ideal for it to take off. And most will not do anything as far as controlling that disease for those leaves, because later on, I mean, I know at V5 that's setting a lot of stage agronomically for production, but from a pathogen standpoint, in the end of the season, those leaves are going to be covered up. Those aren't going to be the leaves you want to protect and to get you to your highest yield response. Yeah. But personally, I've not had a field trial where I've had it. I would love to have one, but that's been kind of the common denominator is it's not treated.
You was talking about the disease and population. What if you've got those high management situations where you're bumping, I'm talking about field population, not just plots. I'm talking about real world deal, but you're bumping pops 38 to 42, and you're 280 to 300 units of nitrogen on. Aren't you really breeding more disease potential there too?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of data that'll show that plots pretty well correlate to a lot of the field things too. So I think you should take some of this pretty seriously rather than just, oh, it's a small plot. Second, you know, if you are trying to really push your yields and maximize yield, there are probably some other things you could be doing as well. Is a fungicide going to get you that much further? I think it'll protect you when you're getting there, but the benefit from it is so variable from one year to the other. That's why it's really hard for a pathologist to say, do it, because it's so inconsistent. One year it may work for you and the other year it doesn't. And that's what our data shows a lot. I think that, you know, I look at sustainability, but you guys who are looking at, I want to be the one that's the top-notch producer in the state. There is a different cap we need to put on and to be able to visit with you and say, yeah, here's some other things you might want to consider if you're really trying to push that and be the top yielder. All right, other questions? If not, appreciate my partner, Crystal.